Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the 16th Annual Vancouver International Women in Film and Festival. Today's panel event is produced by Women in Film and Television Vancouver and Women in Film and Television Canada Coalition in honor of International Women's Day. My name is Anna Delara. I'm a writer, director, producer, performer, and I'm the Vice President of Women in Film and Television Vancouver. Before we begin, I acknowledge that Women in Film and Television Vancouver and the Vancouver International Women in Film Festival are located and operate on the unceded traditional and ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people, Squamish, Stolo, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. On behalf of the festival, I would like to thank the following sponsors and partners: Canada Media Fund, Canadian Heritage, BC Arts Council, Creative BC, City of Vancouver Cultural Services, Telefilm Canada, Indigenous Digital Filmmaking Program Capilano University, BOSA Center for Film and Animation, Front Row Insurance, VIF Connect, William F. White, Stripe Graphics, Karen Leung, Marketing and Design, Chie Times Chie, EMG Design, Pender PR, Loose Lips Media, Tech Butlers, and Ken Hayward. The festival would also like to thank our community partners: Women in the Director's Chair, Vancouver Asian Film Festival, Vancouver Short Film Festival, Vancouver International Mountain Film Festival, Doxa Documentary Film Festival, Powell River Film Festival, Pacific Screenwriting Program, Cold Reading Series, Crazy Eights, and Out on Screen. International Women's Day is a global celebration of social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women. This year, the theme of International Women's Day is hashtag Choose to Challenge, with their official statement, "A challenged world is an alert world," and from challenge comes change. How will you help forge a gender equal world? As most of us know, our field of work, film, television, and other screen-based media in Canada is far from a gender equal world. And in our industry, Indigenous women, Black women, women of color, women with disabilities, LGBTQ plus women, and gender diverse people face even greater barriers to opportunity and equity. So on today's panel, we are focusing on challenging ourselves and challenging Canada's film and television industry to find ways to increase the participation of women who have been historically marginalized. This is not only an urgent human rights issue, but a cultural and economic one. Research has shown that any industry that chooses to lift up women and increase diversity will become more successful in every way. On our panel today, we welcome 8 leaders from many of Canada's key and television organizations in film and television. Jill Golick, researcher from Women in View; Joan Jenkinson, the executive director of the Black Screen Office; Krista Dickinson, executive director of Telefilm Canada; Claude Joly-Coeur, the government film commissioner and chairperson of the National Film Board; Valerie Creighton, CEO of the Canada Media Fund; Barbara Williams, executive vice president of CBC; Prem Gill, CEO of Creative BC; and Doreen Manuel, founder of the Capilano Indigenous Film Program and the current director of the BOSA Center for Film and Animation, and also a board member on the Vancouver Women in Film and Television organization. Each of the panelists will make a short presentation on their initiatives and their goals, or their research and ideas for increasing the diversity of women within their funding and opportunities. At the end of the presentations, we will take questions from you, the audience, so you can start posting them now in your YouTube live stream chat. And to start things off, we're going to first hear from Jill. Jill Golick is a researcher with the national nonprofit research organization, Women in View, who will share with us some of the results of their latest study, which will be released this spring. Jill, take it away.
Thank you, Anna. Hi, everybody. Happy Women's Day. I look forward to the day when we don't need our own day, or we get the whole year. So I wanted to start off by saying Women in View on-screen report, the 2021 edition will be released later this year, covering the production years 2018 and 2019. It's our 6th annual report. Women in View has been collecting data since 2011. So we go back about 9 years now. And while I can't give you the exact numbers until the report is released, I can offer you some insights on trends. So I want to remind you that when Women in View first last put out a report, it was in a couple of years ago. And at that time, for the 2017 production year, 28% of key creative work in television went to women. And by key creative at Women in View, we call key creative writers, directors, and cinematographers. Now, I know some of the other reports are going to be are going to define that differently. So we're going to see differences in numbers when we go that way. So, but back in 2017, 28% of television work was going to women in writing, directing, and cinematography. And at the same time, 25% of the key creative in film and the telefilm funded projects went to women. So we hadn't hit 30% yet. And at the same time, we discovered in our 2017 on our last report was the first time we were able to break out numbers on women of color and Indigenous women, and those numbers were very disturbing. 4% of all the work was going to women of color and less than 1% to Indigenous women. So that was that was really a lot of what we were talking about when we were presenting our last report, because those numbers were so upsetting. And now it's time to start talking about the differences that we've seen, because we know a lot of the organizations that are on this panel today and a lot of individuals across the country put a lot of effort over the last couple of years into gender parity initiatives. And so when we looked at the numbers for 2018 and 2019, which we will show you at the end of this month, we were quite excited to see that the initiatives had worked as designed. So I can tell you now that that there are a lot more women working as directors in this country than there were when we presented our last numbers. But unfortunately, what we're not seeing is a lot, as much movement in diversity as we would like to see. So I guess the big message from this report is gender parity initiatives work, but they don't impact diversity. So just more specifically on those matters, across the country, we've seen a tremendous amount of work going into initiatives to increase the number of women directors. And that has been a tremendous success. Telefilm, CMF, CBC have all, and many organizations have contributed to greater numbers of women directing. Unfortunately, it has been largely white women who have benefited from these initiatives. And anywhere where there wasn't an initiative, we didn't see growth. So, for example, cinematography, where we haven't put a lot of emphasis as a country, we haven't seen a lot of growth for women in cinematography. While we saw some small growth in work for women of color. We saw none in television for Indigenous women. On the other hand, in film, we did see a little more work for Indigenous women, thanks to Telefilm's Indigenous stream. And again, you know, these are 2018, 2019 reports, so that we're dealing with. So we may hear different numbers from the organizations because they may be a little closer to today. So, you know, the big lesson is if we want to be an inclusive industry, we can. You know, we know that the initiatives, the work, the mentorship, the training programs, and specifically the programs that give women the opportunity to have real jobs, to work professionally, have worked. But we have to be very specific about targeting. We can't say just we want more women. We have to say we want all women. One of the things I could tell you about our report that's coming out in the next few weeks is that we saw that Indigenous women work almost entirely on projects that are run by Indigenous women, whether it's as producers, as directors, or as showrunners in television. Indigenous women, we are not seeing them sort of integrated into the larger community of film and television. In terms of women of color, again, there was a small rise in work for women of color, but you know, in film, we see them being funded at the lowest levels, and they didn't benefit as much from the initiatives as other women. We still see an underinvestment in women, in women's projects, whether they're in film, and so it's a strange one. We saw growth this year for women in this report for women, for more work for women, but unfortunately not for all women. So let's be very specific about what we want to change in this industry, and then let's go ahead and do it the way we've been doing it.
Oh, that's great information, Jill. And when exactly is this report coming out?
We will be having a webinar about it on March 25th, and the information will be found through the WIFT organizations.
Great, thank you. So next we are going to hear from Joan Jenkinson. She's the Executive Director of the Black Screen Office, pardon me. Joan, are you ready?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. Jill, before you run off, there's one little request I have for you, and that is that in the next report that you separate out Black women, because I'm pretty sure that the results will be not dissimilar from Indigenous women. But that's another topic. So I am from the Black Screen Office. I lead an organization of Black people working throughout the screen industry. We're 4 months old, and we are led by a board of directors of 9 individuals who are veterans in the screen industry. We're all extremely energized and charged with a sense of urgency about our mandate and the things that we will be able to accomplish within the industry for years to come. So we've just celebrated Black History Month, which it's always bittersweet for me. We acknowledge the history and the present-day experiences of oppression and anti-Black racism, while at the same time celebrating resilience and excellence, and then also looking forward to a message of hope and change. And the celebration of International Women's Day is just as poignant as women globally continue to fight against injustice, oppression, and discrimination. Yet, as Jill says, we have made a lot of progress and we have a lot of accomplishments to celebrate. Black women have been in the trenches of both of these movements. Yet at the intersection of race and gender, Black women have had the worst outcomes. I think at the BSO, we have the benefit of being born out of this massive civil rights movement. It spurred us all on into action. But as Bob Marley wrote, in this great future, we can't forget our past. And speaking of past, I'd like to acknowledge that the achievements of Kimberly Crenshaw, who is a Black law professor and civil rights advocate who coined the term intersectionality in the late 80s. So she helped open the discussion of the double bind faced by victims of simultaneous racial and gender discrimination. So as you know, again, as Jill said, one of the reasons why we're here is to have a conversation about the disproportional impact that gender equity programs and the movement have had on various intersectionalities, particularly, I'll speak about Black women, again, who have always been in the fight, but have experienced situations where white women have always been given the priority. And this is very evident as noted in the Women in View study. So as an organization in its infancy, the Black Screen Office has the benefit of hindsight. We support Black women across age, gender expression, sexuality, ability, body type, religion, recognizing that intersectionality comes in many, many unique ways and with many different challenges. A small example is that we just launched a new project at the Black Screen Office, our first study, which is best practices for creating authentic and inclusive content with underrepresented groups. If anyone has a better title, that would be awesome. But one of the first questions that came up was, which underrepresented group do we start with? And my answer was with everyone. No one should have to wait their turn. As we've seen, sometimes that turn never comes. We're also doing, or hoping to do, a national race-based audience study demonstrating the appetite for our stories. When these stories get made, we want to make sure that there's proportional representation in employment above and below the line. And so another example is that while there are no statistics, we do know that many more Black men than Black women are working as directors. The initiatives designed to increase the number of women directors has mostly benefited white women, as Jill has said, while BIPOC initiatives have benefited Black men. We don't want anyone to lose what they've gained, but we do need to recognize the intersectionality dilemma that Black women face, and we need to address it. And it needs to be factored into new initiatives that I hope we'll develop. So again, this applies not just to directors, but to the entire industry. We want to work with the industry to bring about this kind of change. So just to give you like a quick overview, the Black Screen Office is, our mandate is to support Black Canadians working throughout the screen industries to build their careers, strengthen their networks, and to share their stories, not only across Canada, but around the world. And we're doing that in 3 ways. One is through a career acceleration program, which I'm happy to say is already taking off. We've partnered with broadcasters and funders who are making development and production funds available specifically for Black stories. And secondly, we're working to build relationships with global brands, networks, cable, and streaming platforms to build greater access. And again, we're involved in research and advocacy. I mentioned the 2 projects before. So my hope is that, that we will learn and unlearn some things that that we've been doing. We don't want to move forward with knee-jerk reactions, but with intent, with what the young poet, my new favorite, Amanda Goran, calls a unity of purpose tied to justice and equity and fairness for everyone. So we all have a lot of work to do, and I look forward to coming back and hearing what the outcomes of what our other panelists will report and the commitments that they'll be making, and as well with the Black Screen Office. That my hope is that we'll see measurable outcomes and progress as the year moves forward, and that we'll be able to celebrate with everyone next year.
Great, thank you so much, Joan. We are now going to move on and hear from the leaders of our major government film and television organizations. We're starting out with Krista Dickinson, Executive Director of Telefilm Canada. Krista?
Hi. Thank you, Anna. It's a pleasure to be here on such an important day, International Women's Day, and I'm taking copious notes. I'm surrounded by so many great peers, and I'm going to echo, I think everybody has very similar themes today. Anna, you talk about a gender equal world, absolutely, an everything equal world, to be perfectly frank. And Jill, not seen enough diversity, you're absolutely correct. We have to change what we're seeing in our pipeline. And I want to echo what Joan just said around learning and unlearning. There's no question that this is an era of awakening where we must question status quo. So for Telefilm, in terms of our current position regarding gender equity within key creative roles of financing film projects, we really are working towards parity and greater permanent balance of gender diversity across all financing and equal access. And if you're able to put up the slide that has the first set of stats, that would be great. Thank you. So I think that's the CMF slides, not the Telefilm ones. If we could go to the Telefilm ones, thank you. 2019-20 parity results. We talk about the three key creatives that is basically how we assess the projects that come into Telefilm. So producers, director, and screenwriters. And 2019-20 is the latest year of data that we do have. The following year we'll be releasing it in the summer. So for this year, 2019-20, we have now reached gender parity. So it's a zone, yes, and it has been reached across all key roles. So we're very excited about that. So that means between the 40 to 60% area. What we've seen is women directors, huge progress, and specifically in higher budget programs. So the increase has jumped from 24% to 42%. Now that's practically doubling. And why I'm particularly excited about this, it's been years of effort. And in this one category specifically is where we heard in earnest from you that, from the industry, that it really was an area that needed, strengthening, absolutely. Sorry, something's happened to my computer and it's frozen. I think Wift, you've taken over my computer. So that has been incredibly important to us. And then also is the fact that the funding itself has increased and we've seen $8 million move over in that area. Now, screenwriters, we've seen a small, modest increase, so 2% hike year over year, so moving up to 39%. And where we've seen a bit of a dip was really around the producers, and we think that is a little bit of an anomaly. anomaly, and primarily around the fact that, what we've seen is that the projects weren't coming in the pipeline. So there's something there that we're really looking at. Now, we are looking at enhancing, if we can move to the next slide, thank you. We're enhancing the career development with initiatives such as the Atta Girl Film Lab, and as well great other partners like the Fabienne Collat Foundation, Being Black in Canada. So it's a program, that supports Black women and women of color. And the interesting thing is it's absolutely at all levels of career stages, which is exciting. Now, to throw a few more statistics at you, COVID relief funding. In the COVID relief, we had a really interesting opportunity to look at data collection in a new way, and that was from a majority owned perspective. So we looked at majority owned by women companies that had been coming through Telefilm's portal for the last 3 years. And what we saw was 36% of recipients. So what we did there is we were able to provide those 180 companies with a top up, and that really was very important to see them receiving a total of $10.6 million in emergency funds. Now at the end, I'll send you some links through chat so that you're able to see some of these slides. If we move on to talking about greater diversity, not only parity, but Indigenous women, Black women, women of color, gender diverse people, women with disabilities, this really would be the reflection of a gender equity picture in 2021. And at Telefilm, it starts with culture. So for us, we're looking at what we call inclusion by design, embedding equity, inclusion into everything, our programs, our process, our work culture, and really into our DNA. And this looks at intersectionality, a word that Joan so adeptly told us about the history of it. It includes various intersections of women. What we did in July of 2020, so now 8 months ago, is we launched our Equity and Representation Action Plan at Telefilm. And we have been absolutely actively following through on the entire scope. So I'm going to share a little bit more information on that. So if we can move to the next slide, thank you. Where we worked on it, we're seeing great results. Part of our action plan was to put 4 new roles that are decision-making influencers within the organization at a high level, and 2 of those 4 roles were filled by women of color. Now, additionally, part of our commitment is really hiring 1 out of every 2 new hires to be from an underrepresented identity by 2023, and we're already doing that this year. So this means Black, Indigenous, other racialized people, persons with disability, LGBTQ2+, and as well a minimum of 1 in 3 of any new hires in management. To live and breathe this cultural shift, which is well overdue, it's also about providing anti-racism training, and we have done so, and we'll have completed it across the entire organization. This means nearly 200 employees by the end of this month. And this was built off of something that we'd already done in 2019, where we'd extended to manager level staff unconscious bias training, and very aware that that's not enough. We really need to look at anti-racism as well. So a very, very quick stat when it comes to women at Telefilm. We're known as Telefilles because our staff is comprised of nearly 78% women. So for my last slide, in terms of future goals and timelines for women, moving forward, we are going to continue to implement the Gender Parity Action Plan as a guide, meaning that for all projects of equal quality, we prioritize projects whose key creatives, that's of course, again, director, writer, producer, reflect the diversity of the country. So this means in terms of gender, and it also means as far as Indigenous communities and cultural diversity. And we acknowledged the need, I would say, for intersectionality in support and data. Data is a topic that is incredibly complex. So I think we're just going to scratch the surface of a mention or two here. Anna, I know that other places they're doing full out panels only on that because it's so important and so complex. Telefilm is going to be able to track support for women as well as racialized filmmakers, but we will need to take the steps to analyze that information, where we are supporting racialized women, and what can be done to actually further support them. So that data is absolutely critical. And additionally, same with LGBTQ2 plus communities and person with disabilities to further that inclusivity work. To date, as a funding organization, we just haven't done enough to be inclusive and welcoming. Stories, talent belong in our pipeline, all of them, and in our working group discussion. So we're absolutely committed and so thankful to be part of this conversation today. Thank you once again. Back to you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Krista. That's exciting what Telefilm is doing. We are going to just keep things moving along here so everyone gets a chance to speak and we stay on time. So we're going to hear from Claude Joly-Coeur next. He's the Government Film Commissioner and Chairperson of the National Film Board. Welcome, Claude. You're on.
Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon. Start my video. Yeah. Okay, hello everybody. I'm very happy to be with you at the festival again this year, although sadly virtually. But I have a very emotional connection with the festival because it's 5 years ago that everything in terms of our gender parity commitment started at the NFB. It was in Vancouver. And I remember that Spark was started 6 years ago when I met with Sharon McGowan and Shirley Vercruz, our executive producer in Vancouver. And they told me that there was an urgent need to commit on gender parity. And instantly we decided that we would be committing strongly. So that's what we did 6 years ago. 5 years ago, I mean, when we committed that 50% of our films would be directed by woman director and 50% of our budgets would be allocated to those films. And the year after, we committed on the key creative position and with a very strong commitment to publicly report. And I'm very glad that every year on March 8th, we give our results and that we report. So today you can see our press release. And there is a very nice chart because you can actually see the figures of the last 6 years by category. And you can see how we have been progressing and really firmly connected to those commitments. We have a special nuance from the others. We are also reporting mixed teams. So our figures are either directed by women, men, or mixed teams. So sometimes it's a bit more difficult to compare. But I can say that we have achieved gender parity for our budget and the number of films produced. In terms of a key creative position, we have been doing quite well in terms of screenwriting, in terms of editing, progressing on music, but very far still on photography. So for us, it remains a challenge, and we're working on it. What is great at the NFB is that we're a production organization, and our production teams and actually the entire organization is deeply committed to gender parity. So that's something that we do as a team, that we don't do because we have to do it, but because we believe in it. And that's something where we feel that we can have an influence on building a better world. Diversity, of course, is a key aspect of all of that. 2 weeks ago, we have released our commitments on diversity, equity, and inclusion, with very strong commitments to change the fabric of our organization. We have been working with a lot of diverse filmmakers from a variety of palette of origins, but in terms of the employees of the NFB, we clearly are not at the reflecting the Canadian population. And with the commitments that we have taken 2 weeks ago, we want to change that within the next 2 years. So all of our new key decision-making position will have to be fulfilled by persons coming from underrepresented groups. And in terms of managers, and that managers being from the top to the bottom, because we have managers all over the scale of the organization, it will be 2 out of 3 coming from those underrepresented groups. So changing also the way we are composed will also make us better in terms of inclusivity. The biggest challenge is data collection. We are struggling with that. We have to be very respectful of how we collect data, and working with the other agencies and organizations to put together that a respectful way of collecting data will be a key success of a factor of success. And because I think also that reporting and being nonstop on those figures can have a real effect of in the entire industry. In terms of indigenous production, 15% of our funds are allocated to indigenous directors. So in terms of balance of director, you can also, it follows basically our gender parity targets, and now we manage that. We like Krista just said, we are committing to hire 2 key decision making people, that will a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that will be a champion working with all of us to change the way things are done at the NFB. And also we are hiring a director of Indigenous relations and community engagement. So those are structurally how we are transforming the organization to be basically a better organization. And the last thing I'd like to mention is that one thing that is also key is the remuneration, and now that equality between the fees of women creators working in our project has to be, of course, equal to the remuneration of men. And one last thing that I'd like to mention, we're very proud to say that for a second year we've been awarded the DIS qualification by an organization called Feminine Governance, that analyzes all the decision making and all the processes within the organization. So that's something also that is where we follow closely how we can be a very inclusive and valuing gender parity. Thank you.
Thank you, Claude. I was present at the Women in Film Festival when NFB made that announcement, and it was like a historical moment. Yeah. Thank you for spearheading the movement for us. And we're going to move on now to Valerie Creighton, CEO of the Canada Media Fund. Valerie?
Thanks, Anna. Hello, everybody. Really nice to be with you again this year. Congratulations on making everything work and bringing us all together. So as many of you may know, the CMF first started its gender parity initiative in 2017. It was a 3-year program. So we actually were in the final year of those initiatives in 2019-20. And like others, the categories that we really looked at were producers, writers, directors, content that had women-led positions in order to increase the representation. So as Jill mentioned, cinematographers were not included. So sometimes it's a bit of a challenge to get all of the stats to line up. The one difference that the CMF has is we do not choose the content, unlike the NFB and Telefilm. We still require a broadcaster to be involved with projects before they can be supported through the production communities at the CMF. So we don't select, the broadcasters do. So our initiative really focused on encouraging and incentivizing and asking broadcasters to meet certain targets. So I'm just going to show you where we were at 2019, 2020. If you could bring up the chart, please, Brent. And we do have where we are today. As you know, the year 2020, 2021 isn't quite over. So these stats are temporary, and we'll have that completed by the end of the fiscal year. So if you could bring up the chart, and I'll keep talking while he's bringing up the chart. So what we did to finish off the 3-year initiative was we continued with an overall mandated 50% requirement for 2021. And as we move into from 2019, 2020, as we move into our budgeted approach for this upcoming year, oh, the chart is up. I can't see it, so that's fine. Can everybody, I hope everybody else can see it. All right, I'll just keep going and, oh, you can, perfect. Okay, so there you can see, and I would just caution that these two charts compare all of the genres that we finance and all of the languages. So they're not broken out. We will work on that for a more in-depth reporting. There we go, now I can see it. So you can see in 2019, 2020, close to the target of 40 to 60%, but not quite at 50. And in where we are today at this point in time, 2021, producers, writers are certainly doing okay, still an issue with directors. I don't remember exactly the percentage we started out back in 2017 for directors, but I think it was something like 16 or 17%. So certainly improvement, but still a fair bit to go. I think with the addition of hitting 50% in 2021, it's moved from 33 to 38. So it's on the up, but not yet near the 40%. So we're going to continue that. Just so you know, the percentage at the end of the 3-year initiative was 35%, so we've moved that up to 50. On digital media, we don't have a slide on that, but we've also seen some really significant movement and improvement in our VR, AR, software, and digital media linear series portfolio. All have surpassed 50% in terms of women in those positions of decision making. Games, not there yet. Games is sitting just below 35%, but certainly some increases there as well. So it's better, there's been improvement, although I would certainly support what Jill mentioned, is that all of these initiatives, as we've seen as well, have primarily supported white women. So the issue of intersectionality is something that is now the next imperative. In terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we started talking to the community back in late May, early June of last year. And I just wanted to thank any of you who might be out there that were part of the Black Leaders Group, the Racial Equity Media Collective, the Black Academy, and many, many others. I think Krista mentioned Fabian Coles. These people were terrific at bringing forward numerous ideas about how to move forward towards not just immediate change, but long-term lasting change at some point where we can get this media industry to have everything fully integrated. So thanks to everybody for really helping us with that. The CMF has an equity inclusion strategy, which includes women, of course, Black, other ethnocultural groups, people of color, LGBTQ, etc., and others. The issue, as Claude mentioned, is certainly data. We are working with all of the other funders, associations, the BSO, Racial Equity Collective, and others to take a look at data. And a big element in that is intersectionality. How we can collect data on women who self-identify as in one or other of those categories, along with being women. And as you all know, there's lots of issues around that in terms of privacy and legality, but the team that is working on this is really terrific, and I think we will certainly find our way through it. In terms of our own goals, and I guess I'll just mention, I almost take this for granted, but we've been working so closely with the Indigenous Screen Office for many years now, since its inception. And both the ISO and many of the racial equity media collectives and the BSO were really, we were able to, through COVID, through that additional federal resource, provide resources to those organizations and many individuals within that community. We invested just over 16 million in totality for the Black people of color and other communities, and an additional, I think it was about 9 million with the ISO. So that really helped take the pressure off many of those organizations and individuals working in our sector who had already been marginalized or not had the kind of access that many others in the community did. That was extremely helpful, and now the real way forward is to make sure that what that money was able to do, that we are able to use that, we are able to learn from that, and we are able to continue to support those initiatives into the future. You'll see some of that at the end of this month as we announce our new program guidelines. Our board meeting on all of this is tomorrow with our board. So I won't speak too much about that, just in case, they have other ideas, but for sure we will be implementing the first year of the equity and inclusion strategy, and all of the initiatives there are twofold. They're embedded in and across the CMF program, and there are also individual initiatives through sector development that will support those communities. So our goals coming up are certainly to continue moving towards the full gender balance of 50%, implementing the first year of the strategy, tracking and reporting, and especially on the data piece, looking to ensure how we can really tackle the question of intersectionality. I'm going to leave it at that. Not too many charts this year and very little sense of humor. So thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Valerie. And we will move on to Barbara Williams. She's the Executive Vice President of CBC. Barbara?
Thanks, Anna. You make me smile and laugh anyway, Valerie, not to worry. I am so encouraged by this conversation when I think about the number of decades, dare I say, that we've been trying to have this conversation, how it does continue to evolve in a very hopeful way. And I applaud your theme this year of #choose to challenge, because actually what I've learned more than anything in all of these years is that it is all about choosing to do it and choosing to make a difference, and what power there is in that choice. I would be remiss to not acknowledge off the top here on International Women's Day that our CEO, Catherine Tate, is the first woman to run CBC Radio-Canada in its 85 years of history. Took a hell of a long time to get there, but there she is, and it's wonderful to see. We have made incredible progress, if you will, at the CBC with gender parity in terms of key creatives in our commissioned programming. We made a declaration a few years ago that we would get there, and technically get there we have. We have gender parity in our commissioned content in the key creatives. And yet it's a failure. And it's a failure because of everything that you're all talking about, which is our failure to acknowledge and embrace that gender alone is not inclusion. We must be truly inclusive across race, across community, across sexual identity, across disability. And although we can tick a single box of gender parity, we are so far still from truly embracing true inclusion. And so the work is big ahead of us. And yet, if we choose to do it, we will accomplish it. Of that, I have no doubt. So we have a couple of ways that we go at that at the CBC. We have one of our strategic priorities, which is to reflect contemporary Canada. And we take that priority to both reflect that inside the corporation as well as outside, because we do believe that until and unless we are truly reflective inside, we won't be able to accomplish what we need to do outside. And so one of the things, and a number of you have mentioned it, it's so great to hear we're all understanding we need to do the same work, is changing the decision makers inside. So you will, many of you maybe be aware that Sally Cato made some significant changes in the scripted team this year to split development and production, and to hire 2 new development executives to both run development for comedy and development for drama, and both are women of color. And that alone, frankly, starts to change the conversation inside about what stories are we telling and who is best suited to tell them, and where and how do we discover and encourage and promote those new voices to help us tell those stories that might not have come in our door before. So that single change has made a difference to what's going on inside. And across the company, we have very determined objectives about hiring, about retention, and about promotion for women of color, for people of color, and for people with disabilities, as well as Indigenous peoples, who are extremely important part of the CBC mandate and the work that we do at the CBC. So we are determinedly now moving on to make sure that our objectives and our targets are truly inclusive. And so you may recall that 2 BAMFs ago, if you will, when we were all there in person still, Catherine made a declaration about us, 1 key creative on every one of our commission shows coming from an equity-seeking group. Well, actually, that was an important statement to make at the time. And we have so realized that that is nowhere near aggressive enough in the work that we need to do if we're going to accomplish our goals. And so we are constantly revising what we really can do in terms of mentoring, job shadowing, and bringing into the fold new voices that are going to reflect and embrace other communities that they represent. And we actually find, as everyone does, if you do this work, that there's tons of talented people out there, tons. We need to make the environment welcoming. We need to make the process fair, and we need to really put our put our choices right front and center in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. Many of you have spoken about data. I will say only that I support all of the need that we're all expressing to have good data about what's going on, what gets measured gets changed, and all the complexities that come with data. We face 2 at the CBC, but are determined to find fair and reasonable and transparent ways to collect data that can be useful to us while protecting privacy. Ultimately, what matters most to us is that in all of this work, that it's sustainable, that this isn't just about reaching for something and technically accomplishing it and then letting it go. This is about sustained change to who we are and why we are, and to come back to that first commitment to reflect contemporary Canada, both inside the CBC and to reflect all of our audiences who are desperately looking for a way to more personally identify with their public broadcaster. And our challenge here is to evolve the CBC to really connect with who the population of Canada is today, and connect with them on television, but also connect with them in audio, and connect with them in digital, and connect with them in podcasts, and connect with them in GEM, and connect with them in our news organization, which again is a powerful, powerful place of storytelling that is aggressively working to better understand the decision makers in news, the choices of stories and how they're told, so that Canada can really see itself reflected back from its public broadcasters. So enormous amounts of work, which has become, for me as the leader at CBC, the only work ultimately that really will sustain the organization and change it into something that we can all be so proud of for the future. And out of this work comes all the other work we do. If we get this right, we will get everything right. And if we don't get this right, we'll get nothing right. So it is the conversation that happens every day across every level, in every team, not only in our programming and commissioning world, but across the organization as a whole. And I'll maybe just leave it there for now.
Thank you, Barbara. That's a really good point about the fact that it's a choice, and it's exciting to hear what CBC is choosing to do in that regard. And now we're going to bring things closer to home here. We're going to hear from some of our BC provincial leaders. We're going to start with Prem Gill, CEO of Creative BC. Prem?
Hi, Anna. Thank you so much. And great to see so many colleagues from across the country joining us here today. I'm speaking to you from the unceded territories of the Coast Salish, Musqueam, and Squamish people. And for me, this is all very personal, as I know it is for many people out there who are watching and listening and have been having this conversation, as Barb said, literally for decades. I remember being at an initial meeting when the concept of Women in View came together. I think it was 2008. And I remember having a very clear conversation that intersectionality, even though I didn't have the language then about it, had to be something that had to happen in parallel to gender. And that work is just starting now. And while it's disappointing, nobody, many of us didn't give up on it. And we are getting there. But I'm here to tell you about what's happening at Creative BC, but also just a little bit more on, why it's important to people like me. And, when you grow up, I was born in Canada, and when you grow up in a place where you're embarrassed and ashamed of who you are because of the culture and the society that you live in that was certainly not post anti-racism in my lifetime, it's really terrible. And this work, while it was triggered by a tragedy this summer of the murder of George Floyd, it triggered protests globally. This is not new, and certainly not new to a lot of the work that's happening in our organization and across all the organizations that you're hearing from today. But it's also not going to transform overnight. And I think a couple of you said that as well. This is really a long game. And we all have to make a long-term commitment on various levels. So for us here at Creative BC, everything that we are approaching, both internally, externally through our programs, is with what we call an active Jedi lens, focused on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it applies to all stages of everything that we do. So I'm going to read from my list because I don't have slides in direct response to some of the questions, but just to give you a brief sense. And of course, we're local here. So if you are tuning in, we're always happy to continue the conversations both across the country, but certainly here in BC as well. So we very specifically started tracking representation through our applications when we had through our music funding in 2016-17. And we've been refining and working with colleagues again across the country on self-identification questions, and particularly have taken an intersectional lens, as I mentioned, with focus on ensuring that Indigenous, Black, racialized people and people with disabilities, as well as LGBTQ+ applicants, are prioritized. We've also been implementing this type of tracking across the programs we run, which fund different types of recipients and activities. For example, it is easy to track the representation of an individual, but it is more complicated to measure the representation in a group of artists on a film set or in a company. So we're taking into consideration the mandate of companies and organizations, ownership, and artists presented on stage, and so on and so forth. So you can see again what many people were speaking to here, that there's going to be multiple ways that we implement measurementation, there's a new word for you. We've implemented in consultation with underrepresented groups, targeted outreach, support for applicants, incorporated equity into evaluation of our programs. Weighted criteria may or not be understood by all people, so really ensuring that when we do use adjudication panels or juries, that they understand this. But for our programs more widely, this 13 of our current 24 programs have weighted criteria for diversity, and that is something that is continuing to evolve. 2 programs are very specific with set targets, and 5 programs are targeted funds targeted at either Indigenous, Black, or people of color. Only 4 smaller programs of ours didn't collect diversity information, and those were within the publishing industry. So I'm just sort of talking more broadly about Creative BC as an organization where we represent the creative industries at large. And one of our 24 programs this year took less action because it was the relief program. So it was an automatic to recipients of previous funding programs. So understanding that even that within itself going forward, we really need to think about all of these things. We've also done a lot of work on the below the line workforce here in British Columbia in combination with the above the line, but very specifically on representation, promotions, and how people are trained to move ahead and enter the film and television industry. So more to come on that. A lot of work we've done comes through partnerships. So we have with the Rogers Documentary Fund a partnership that there is waiting for equity seeking groups and specifically for Black, Indigenous, and people of color applicants. With the Harold Greenberg Fund, we also had very active identification of communities who were underrepresented. Similarly, with the CBC Digital Production Fund, where we gave preference to projects for women, Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color, and persons with disabilities. And the intent is that 50% of the successful projects will come from female creators. We also have a strong partnership with Telestory Hive, which has had specific programs focused on Indigenous filmmakers amongst other groups. Some of the tactics that we've taken in order to support communities or individuals who may not have seen themselves as part of this ecosystem is offering coaching on how to have successful applications, on really understanding not just Creative BC programs, but more broadly, and also prioritizing inclusion in the consultation phase in everything that we do in the outreach. So again, it has to be multifaceted and happening across the organization. So the question of how diversity, including Indigenous women, Black women, women of color, gender diverse people, LGBTQ+, and again, going back to our JEDI principles, there's sort of 9 very specific targeted things that I'll summarize for you here. So it's targeted programs, so actually having very specific programs for people, weighted criteria and prioritization across all of our programs, targeted outreach and support, including information sessions, outreach, consultations, grant coaches, and staff support, data collection and analysis based on voluntary self-identification by applicants, broader industry consultation, and representation in decision making. And partnerships, as I mentioned, are critical, and we have some partnerships here in BC with the First Peoples Cultural Council. And communications and prioritization of storytelling about underrepresented creators and creative companies owned by underrepresented people. There are people out there, as again, I think Barb just mentioned, there's so much talent. They have not felt this is an inclusive system that we're all part of. We have to examine why that is, and certainly a big priority for us is the ongoing conversation internally, whether it's anti-racism training, whether it's our focus on bringing this JEDI lens across our internal policies and external policies. And then I have to really thank Women in Film and Television Vancouver and for your advocacy work that you have done relentlessly for many, many years. And we've had so many conversations, sometimes tough conversations, but very honest conversations on what we need to continue to do together. So I'll leave it at that. And thank you again for inviting me here today.
Thank you so much, Pram. I can totally relate a lot what you're saying there. So we're now going to move on to We're now going to move on to Dori Manuel. She's the founder of the Capilano Indigenous Film Program. It's the first of its kind in the world, and she's also the current director of the BOSA Center for Film and Animation and the Vancouver Women in Film and Television. Doreen?
Hi, happy Matriarchs Day. I'm a guest on the territories of the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh territories. Firstly, in speaking about the issue of intersectionality, firstly, we need to re-examine and give up the worldview, which has been based on false, inaccurate information and stereotypes. That common worldview is a manifestation and manipulation of the public by the government and industry for the purposes of economic gain. The people of wealth and power used it as a tool to continue their control over economy and power. They used and still use media to disseminate stereotypes that encourage discrimination and foster institutional biases, keeping the privileged. Indigenous cultures, customs, values, norms, practices, plus the traumatic effects of historic oppression like Indian residential schools, the caste system, the laws that imprisoned us for practicing our culture, the historic marginalization and discrimination are all factor into the differences that people outside of our nationhood interpret as reinforcement reasons to keep us out. These effects show up as coping practices that some like to call our soft skills. I want to touch on that economy for one more second and just point out that billions of dollars are raised in Canada from our Indigenous lands and resources, in many cases to the detriment of the health and well-being of Indigenous people. The majority of those funds go to support non-Indigenous populations. Any one of you look around, if you're in a government office, that was paid for off of the blood and sweat of my people in our territory. If you go out onto the road and you drive on those roads were paid for by the tears of my grandmothers over the loss of life that we have suffered trying to protect our Aboriginal title and rights. I just want to, and so like, why lock us out? To keep us corralled, beaten down, oppressed, and as far away from the economy as possible. Our history is that we were confined by law to stay on the reservations, therefore excluding us from all employment. We were not permitted to hire a lawyer to defend ourselves when we were charged with a crime of Canada. We were locked in residential schools. Myself personally, I am a survivor of one of those schools. All of these parts of colonization has created vast inequality. Today, on average, the funds that Indigenous people access are drastically lower, and there are less funds available than non-Indigenous populations. Therefore, the quality of our stories is sacrificed. We can't produce mystical beings from our stories because those low budgets can't support the required visual effects. That also means that our crews are underfunded, underpaid, meaning that many of our crew, the people that I have spent years training, can't stay in the industry because they can't afford to. Since all funding used to develop everything around us comes from funds raised from the territories and resources that come from Indigenous lands, I challenge the industry to utilize the funding that they enjoy by including Indigenous people. Take that land acknowledgement one step further. What can be done to change and address the issues? Disrupt the flow of economy. Stop the funding pipeline that currently leads directly to the privileged. Change that course to funnel to underrepresented populations. That path of funds has been going since the beginning to the privileged. It's time it tipped disproportionately toward the underrepresented for a long enough period of time to even that playing field. The privileged will try to stop that change by rationalizing that action would turn industry funding into a social program, sacrificing the quality of product. This again is a ploy to spread stereotypes and false information to keep the funds reserved for the privileged. Recognize that. Right now, all funding programs need to create specific programs for underrepresented populations and increase funding amounts for underserved populations. And create programs that create pathways into all unions for underrepresented populations. Commit to hire a set percentage of underrepresented populations within management positions in all organizations and companies, and appointments to boards and festivals, broadcasters, and public organizations. We also need to set up a committee to review and make recommendation toward implementing equity and inclusion measures within the film industry work standard practices. By this, I mean examining the work practices like the length of the workday, daycare benefits, services that support wellness. We need to change the makeup of programming broadcasters carry to broaden the worldview and to increase representation. We need to create a new position for an equity inclusion coordinator or coordinators throughout Canada and for productions. We need to convene a process for all productions to participate in equity and inclusion programs. We need to educate industry to widen their worldview. This means the creative and crew behind the camera who are responsible for hiring and the creatives writing the stories. There are still far too many non-Indigenous writers defining our identity by writing our stories. And there are still far too many funders funding those productions. The programs that I've been involved with are, for 13 of its 20 years history, I've managed and taught in the Indigenous Digital Filmmaking program at Capilano University. Through that program, I've trained countless Indigenous people to enter the industry workforce and to become creatives. I'm a matriarch advisor to the IM4 virtual and augmented reality training program for Indigenous people at Emily Carr University. I'm a founder and instructor for the Women in Film and Television Tricksters and Writers feature film screenwriting program for Indigenous women. I serve on the MPIA Equity and Inclusion Committee. We are delivering decolonization training for industry members. I'm part of a team who started the Indigenous Digital Accelerator. We provide funds to Indigenous businesses to develop and expand their digital platform. We just finally hired a manager, and we're on the verge of launching those funds and making them available to Indigenous producers. Most recently, I've developed the first ever Filmmakers in Indigenous Leadership and Management Business Affairs program to enhance the skill level of early and mid-career Indigenous producers. We developed this program in response to years of the Indigenous community stating that there's a lack of Indigenous producers and that is one of the greatest detriments that we are encountering as far as getting our stories told. I've worked with Directors Guild, Disney, and IATSE 891 to pilot a mentorship pathway training program for Indigenous, Black, and people of color. So far, they've accepted 10 trained crew into 2 different major productions. 4 of those people have been Indigenous. There's a lot being done. I heard the panel speak, and it's encouraging to hear so much that is being done. But like Prem said, there is so much more that needs to be done because the equity and inclusion is moving very slow, the introduction of it. I want to close by making one point, and I was really also encouraged to hear Prem use this acronym. I want to close by saying that another step that can be taken on a personal level for you personally that goes beyond the land acknowledgement. I encourage people to recognize that this is Turtle Island. We call it Turtle Island. We don't call it North America because that's the terminology that we've invented. We've talked about our territories and how that's a common phrase that we use to speak about North America. These are the territories of the Indigenous people. Out of respect for our ancestors who suffered to protect these lands and territories, and as part of reconciliation, I encourage the use of IBPOC, Indigenous, Black, and people of color. Might seem like a small thing, but it's shifting that worldview, just like the land acknowledgement is shifting our worldview. Recognizing that these are our territories, and everything that you gain, everything that you are enjoying, including the water that you drink, the water that's the base of your coffee, everything that sustains you comes from our territories. And we are suffering. And we shouldn't be suffering this much on our own lands and territories. So as a way to keep you thinking about us, I encourage these sort of things. And that's part of what the land acknowledgement started as, is a way to keep you thinking about us and where you stand and what your life is based on, the foundation that your life is based on. I want to thank each of the panel members who've come forward and who have worked, that I have watched working so hard over the years to find solutions to these problems. And I want to say thank you from my heart. Thank you for all of this work, because I know that you need encouragement and you need to know that we are watching and we are in support of this important work that you are doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doreen. Thank you. You're always so inspiring when I listen to you speak. Thank you. So we're going to move on. We have just a few minutes left. We're going to move on to questions, but also if any of the panelists have any questions for each other as well, please feel free to type it into the chat. So I am just looking in here on the questions that have been submitted by our audience. So this one says, I am also interested in separating out women who are immigrants and do not have English or French as a first language. So it's not really a question. So I guess what they're saying is, yeah, it's also identifying them as well. Because I know personally, I do know people that, English isn't their second language, and I've had to help them with their applications. And I believe Prem was saying about the coaching that was being done at Credit BC. But is there anything specifically, any initiatives for people that don't speak English as their first language or French?
Anna?
Yes.
Is it okay if I just jump in for a minute? It's Valerie. I just can't figure out what. At the CMF, we have a diverse languages program, and we have supported content in about 13 languages other than English, French, or Indigenous. And there are, again, part of the struggle there is the broadcast connection to that, but there's been some terrific content that's been supported through that. So I'm happy to connect offline with the person who has that question. That's a different issue than data and collection, but if they would like to connect with me, I'll put them in contact with the program staff who run that program and see if there's any support there. I also just wanted to say one thing to the absolutely heartwarming Doreen. Mm-hmm. Every time I hear her speak, I have the same reaction. Doreen, I just wanted to let you know, if you're not aware, we just rebranded everything at the CMF, and we worked with elders and community organizations, universities, and our creative and production community. And we now have the CMF and its images logo translated into 12 Indigenous language. And they're so beautiful when you see them. They're on our website. So it's a step. That's all I'll say about that. But it was really heartwarming to work with all those people and watch their emotional reactions and their wonderful advice through that process.
And it's Barb, if I could just, I'm sorry, Doreen, did you want to speak? I didn't mean to cut you off there. I just
I just wanted
go ahead, Laura. Go ahead. No.
You thought that this meant that I wanted to speak. This is a thank you. I've adopted this from the Coast Salish people. They raise their hands when they say thank you. Just want to point that out. Thanks.
No, thank you. No, I appreciate you sharing that. You're very, very small on my screen, so it was hard to know, but thank you for sharing that. I wanted just to add to Valerie, we have an incredible group of people in Yellowknife who have embraced the Indigenous Language Archive program at the CBC. The CBC has a phenomenal archive of the spoken of 8 spoken languages, Indigenous languages, and that they are all on tape and in forms that are disintegrating in front of our eyes. So we've embraced the digitization of that that archive, and it's been a phenomenal project. And out of it has come the first of what will be the first of many podcasts, actually, in Inuktitut. And we're looking at continuing to find ways to both preserve but also expose and share the many Indigenous languages that are being at our risk of being forgotten. And so we're trying to help where we can in that initiative. I mean, we do broadcast both radio and television in some of the Indigenous languages as well. But this archive project is quite special and something that the CBC is really proud to be supporting.
Great. Krista, you have your hand up. Did you want to chime in?
Hi there. Yes, thank you. So at Telefilm, we primarily work in French and English. However, we have done quite a number of co-productions and other film projects in multi-languages. So think of Natasha, which was a mix of Russian and English. And of course, through our Indigenous stream, the film that really pops out for me, of course, is The Edge of a Knife, which, was such an integral part of saving Haida Gwaii language that very few people speak anymore. So I do think that, our works, that content, storytelling, language is such a big part of it. So it's something that I think all of us are exploring in different ways.
Great. Yeah, I think one of the challenges, if you're a director, a writer, producer from another country, because I have met people that have immigrated to Canada, it's just a challenge to really navigate the applications as well if English isn't your first language. But just something to, I don't know, think about. The other thing, so the other question we have is directed directly to Telefilm.
Anna, sorry, it's Prem.
Oh.
Can I just respond to that last question quickly, just
course,
before you move on? Sorry, I'll be really fast.
No,
But
please.
just on that front, just on in terms of recent immigrants especially, and I think what's happening in our overall COVID economy, which another panelist in our chat noted that, we know women have been disproportionately, hurt by the COVID in terms of economics, and women of color and Indigenous women and Black women even more so. And, I think about certainly here in BC, the tourism industry and the hospitality industry and hotels, and a lot of women of color and Black women and Indigenous women clean hotels. This is a job that, many of my relatives have had over the years, and they've been unemployed for many months, many of these people, or they may not be going back to jobs. And I would just think about more broadly us as an industry, especially in those below the line jobs and sectors that we're thinking of, and what Doreen talked about in terms of those pathways into labor organizations. There's a community of really hardworking, amazing people out there that I think we can all together think about stronger ways to introduce pathways into this industry that we haven't even thought about. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Krista, do you have your hand up again? Yes.
No, I think you said there was a question for Telefilm.
Yes, right to Telefilm. So it's what percentage of the Telefilm support went to companies owned by women? Do you have that data by any chance?
Company support, yes. So when it comes to the COVID top up, it was company support, and it was 36%.
Okay, so 30% owned by
36%.
36
owned by women, correct.
So we should also mention the impact of COVID on women. Does anyone have any numbers to let us know what is currently happening to women? Nope, I don't see any.
I don't off the top of my head, but there is an organization that I'm involved in called the Prosperity Project that recently released a report. Very, it doesn't cover everything, but certainly it is the evidence that, if you need it, that shows that women have been disproportionately impacted. And again, racialized women, Black women, and Indigenous women even more so by COVID.
Great. So just as a final question, and see anything else, I'm just curious, what do you see as a timeline for your initiatives? Some of you have mentioned some, but a timeline for your initiatives, and what would be your measures for success? When will you know if your proposals and plans are succeeding? Anyone can jump in.
I think success, truthfully, Anna, is the fact that this conversation continues, and that's absolutely integral. So it's not, a reaction, but we all become incredibly proactive with our action plan. From a parity perspective, we're there. It truly is, how do we leapfrog and ensure that equity is happening on all levels from an intersectional perspective? Everything that we've laid out in the action plan at Telefilm, we have achieved, and we're continuing to expand. I really think that we're going to continue to uncover new areas of opportunity. So how do we turn challenge into an opportunity is what I'm really looking towards. I was speaking recently to Graham Mason at Screen Australia, and he was telling me that in their situation, their Indigenous unit is 20 years old. So there's so much ahead of Telefilm Canada, ahead of Canada in Indigenous content creation and that proper funding that's behind it. And that he's saying that, what he's seen from the results is that they're over indexing right now, which is, that's, I can't wait to be having this conversation with everybody. Just a matter of time, hopefully, fingers crossed.
Thank you, Chris.
Oh, Claude, go ahead. Were you going to talk?
Yeah, just quickly. I think it will never be done, and it's an ongoing process. But I think movements like just a panel like we have today is something that is keeping as a group that change. There are ideas, there are challenges that are being raised on an ongoing basis, and I think that the movement of all of us working in that direction of the goodwill will have an impact, but that will never be achieved. So it's but will always improve.
Thank you.
God, I hope it'll be achieved. Because there's a lot of people doing a lot of work for an awful long time if it doesn't. I think the measure of if it works will be on the screen. And it'll be when you walk onto a set and you see more than a couple of people of color. And when you look at awards and international recognition and you see from the country a real reflection of what Canada is. It won't happen overnight. I agree with you, Claude, on that point. I think the biggest concern is, there's been a massive, as Joan said, the pendulum is really swinging hard to get change to happen. And that takes a lot of sustained energy. And while everybody has jumped in all over the country, broadcasters, everybody included, we've heard a lot today about what the agencies are doing. I didn't get into, staffing at the CMF and all of that. I think those are all critical and very important. But the sustainability of that is what concerns me, because like many initiatives, if we don't really find a clear path forward, it'll slide. Doreen's comments are really relevant to that. We still have the largest Indigenous program in the country, but has it achieved some of the things, Doreen, that you raised? Maybe in some facets, but not entirely. And I think, it's going to take collectively all of us to make sure that the passion and really the strong path forward to have this be sustainable and have it continue, and make sure it's not just something that everybody works on for a little while and then it kind of slides off the priority table, so to speak. I mean, we're under a massive change in this country right now. I will say, just from the CMF's perspective, we won't be able to survive with the current system. I shouldn't say this publicly. Whether the CMF survives or not is kind of irrelevant. But what's important to me is whether the content that we support survives and has some sustainability and consistency moving forward. The way this industry has developed, a single broadcast trigger, sorry, Barb, but it's just not going to happen. The field is too narrow. There's just not enough. We know that before our system came into place with the broadcaster envelopes, it was already 50% oversubscribed, and that continues today. So something has to shift here. we're looking forward actually to a whole modernization of the CMF with a whole bunch of factors in place. We'll be coming out publicly to a very large industry consultation for a month, starting March 16th, both invitational roundtables and open ones. You're all welcome to be there. But I think it's going to take not just everybody's individual initiatives about, staffing and internal change. Yes, those are critical steps, but it's going to take a collective consciousness to actually shift. And that's something that no one single organization can do on their own. Because if we do it well and Claude doesn't, what good does it do? If we do it together, then maybe we've got something a little different. And we saw that with the Indigenous Screen Office. I think, I don't know even how many years ago, it's at least 6. There was a lot of questions about what to do. We had Imaginative had a panel, and everybody was under a lot of financial pressure, and budgets were being reduced. And, with willingness of a lot of people, we brought people together and we did deep consultation led by an Indigenous person, and the office is here today. Is it perfect? No. It's been trying to get its money to do programming for a very long time. But again, I think it just has to be a sustained and collective initiative, step by step, year by year, until we see the results of that shift with what's on the screen and with those working behind the screen. So thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to say something, Barbara, before?
Yeah, I would just add, I support all of that, Valerie. I think we're all really deep in the sort of reimagining of what this industry is and how it functions in Canada and what we're really trying to accomplish. But I guess one of the core things I feel we are embracing here is an acknowledgement that the power has to shift, and the financial power has to shift. And so it's not about a white production company hiring some Black people. It's about empowering people to own their own stories. And I mean that literally, own the IP, own the story, and tell the story, and really being clear about whose story that is to tell and what role can we play in supporting that to happen, but not getting in the way of that or thinking that we actually have a financial stake in that story the way the owner of that story really does. And we've had some fascinating and difficult conversations when production companies bring in a story that should be told by somebody else and should be owned by somebody else. And having that conversation about what role the initial person bringing the story in might be able to play, but it won't be a majority ownership and it won't be a primary storyteller. And those, to me, in some ways, are what's really potentially going to really start to change things. And I'm not saying any of this is easy, but we have to be uncomfortable with some of these conversations, and we have to hand some of the power over. I get that. I totally get that. And it's just the right thing to do. And some of us have been redefining what the right thing is to do for decades now. And it's a whole other step of redefinition here that we have to take. We just have to take.
Thanks, Barbara. So that's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank all our panelists for participating today in this it's encouraging and important conversation. Please join us for the rest of our virtual festival with the theme Resilience, Challenge, Change. This year's film program runs March 4th to the 14th on demand on VIF Connect. Please visit our festival website at viwff.ca for film and ticket information. We also have an entire week of online events, including artist talks and workshops. We kicked off yesterday at 5 p.m. with our first of 2 Best of the Fest Awards announcements. And next up tomorrow, we have at 11 a.m. Pacific time, a genre panel with keynote Diana Williams, Kinetic Energy Entertainment, and representatives from the 5 finalist creative teams of this year's From Our Dark Side Genre Development Incubator, moderated by Lindsay Peters, Program Director of From Our Dark Side. For more information, again, please visit our website at viwff.ca events. Thank you again to our panelists. And remember, a challenged world is an alert world. And from challenge comes change. Happy International Women's Day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.